Welcome. I'd like to welcome you to this event at the Resilience Hub today on innovations and early warning, early action. My name is John Harding. I head the Crew Secretariat at the World Meteorological Organization, and I'm very happy to welcome the audience who are present here today, the audience online, and our speakers. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank our partners who have set up this Resilience Hub. What a great environment to exchange around an important topic. So we have heard many times at this COP about the importance of understanding risk, taking preventative action, or in the words of the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership who helped set up this event, the need to take early action. So this event today is not so much about making the case, and hopefully we're all convinced of the need for early action. Today we're going to look at how we do it. And for this, we have 5 panelists. 2 are connecting virtually. 3 I'm very happy to have here in person in Glasgow. And each one of these panelists is going to present one innovative initiative or approach. And these initiatives were the result of a rigorous selection process. And they were selected, they were chosen to present today because they bring forward a certain way of doing things. And each one of them represents new ideas, new technologies, and new ways of doing things. So we feel very fortunate that we're going to hear from these initiatives. And we have asked each one of our panelists today to make a short introduction to their initiative, explaining to us why it is innovative. And after each one of these presentations, we will have an opportunity to ask questions. Well, for the audience here, you may have questions, but also the audience online. We invite you to submit your questions online. There is a platform to provide that, and we will be capturing your questions, and I will certainly be asking questions from our panelists with regard to their initiatives. So let's start now with our first panelist, and we're going to test our technology straight away because our first panelist is connecting virtually. And so I understand that Bonnie Haskell, who's the technical advisor at the Global Disaster Preparedness Center, is online. And I invite you to make your presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Are you able to show my slides, perhaps? Okay, great. Again, thank you. It's a pleasure to be joining you all this morning from the Red Cross Global Disaster Preparedness Center, where I'm a technical advisor. And what I'll be talking about today, as I see I don't have the intro slide, I forgot to add that, is our Atlas Ready for Business mobile app. So just for some context first about why we developed this app is when thinking about the session title and frontline innovations, we were thinking about those innovations that are really designed for and by people on the front lines, those communities that are most impacted by the climate crisis. And when you think about this, designing for early warning, early action, and really community resilience, you might not immediately make the link with small and medium-sized businesses. But then you think about your daily life. You think about how you walk to the local market every day, walking perhaps the clothing store that is family owned, or by a small restaurant that employs a neighbor of yours. So when you take the time to think about it, you realize that small and medium-sized businesses are core to the community. They provide goods and services, employment, and a place for the community to gather. Their resilience is really key to community resilience overall. And yet these businesses, which I'll call SMEs in the interest of time of this presentation, are largely unprepared to act early. And I want to say that this is not because they aren't aware of the need to act early or be prepared. It might be to the lack of access to preparedness information. This can be due to financial resources, human resources or even understanding of, or time or understanding of hefty materials that are circulated that often contain a lot of jargon, which sometimes I struggle with as well. And that's why at the Red Cross, we wanted to create a tool with practitioners and with community members to address these barriers and provide business preparedness information right into the hands of these SMEs, those on the front lines. And this is through our mobile app called Atlas Ready for Business. And to break up this presentation of me just talking a lot, on the next slide, we should have a video to play that provides an overview of the mobile app. So we can go ahead and play that if you can, if possible. Okay, if there's no video, we can just go to the next slide and I'll describe the app a little bit to you. Good thing I already have the features listed here just in case the video didn't work. So Atlas Ready for Business mobile app was developed a couple of years back in partnership with our Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies. And it is an app that has a leveled approach that brings you through 5 levels of SME business preparedness from an evidence base with some partners. And it really tries to address different barriers that I just mentioned by having a chat feature where it's Atlas, this bear, guiding an SME business owner through the levels of business preparedness. And it's a chat feature because often when we heard from those in the communities that what's offered to them in terms of business preparedness is often these long workshops. They might be weeks long, and it's just a one-way information funnel. It's a lecturer telling you what to do, and instead it's not very engaging. So we wanted to make an engagement feature and also a practical feature where they have different scenarios of different hazards and climate-related hazards and impacts that they can walk through. It's also self-paced. In the interest of time, we realized that business owners really want to focus on running their business and might not have time to think about business preparedness. So this is self-paced. In total, it's about 20 to 25 hours, but they can do it, of course, at a pace that works for them. And we can send reminder notifications that are auto-timed so that if they can come back in a week and be reminded about where they are and the importance of going through the whole process, because business preparedness, business continuity is mostly about the process as well as the output at the end. They can share a lot of the tasks throughout the levels with colleagues so that they can prepare together, and it's not just the business owner in a silo. And at the end, through their answers, through their tasks that they are assigned, through this engagement with the chat feature and the information the business owner is providing, it generates a business continuity plan, their very own personalized business continuity plan that they can print out. They can share again with their colleagues or share with different partners in their supply chain, or really wear it as a badge of honor in the community saying, we're here for you, we're going to be open, we're going to act early, and we're ready to help you as a community be resilient as well. And a lot of the content in there, it ranges from climate-related hazards. You've got climate change content specifically. You have pandemic preparedness content. We have nature-based solution content coming soon in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. We have a business planning aid for micro enterprises and a risk assessment coming soon. And this is all in 18 languages, all of the content, though we're going to be expanding upon that as well. And I just want to quickly touch on the fact that it's not just about an innovative approach in terms of these tech features, but that really at the Red Cross, we do not believe in just the technology coming in and saying, these are the features that are going to lead to impact. But really, we believe that it's working with those on the front lines, practitioners, local Red Cross national societies, in partnership with their Chamber of Commerce, in partnership with trade associations, or in partnership with the Nature Conservancy to create content, their own contextualized content that can be included in the app so that community members can recognize themselves in it, recognize the language, recognize the content that resonates with them, and prepare accordingly. So we think that this is innovative for 2 reasons, really. It is the tech approach and the different levels and features that I mentioned, but it's also about the process that you work together with your partners to create the content. We did that in Uganda with the Ugandan Red Cross creating climate change content, in Latin America with El Salvador and Peru creating micro enterprise content. And we created it. We're creating it right now with the French Caribbean islands for island-related content and imagery that resonates. And we'll be creating in Indonesia. So it's really a global scaling tool. for nature-based solutions. And it really challenged the way we think about impact in terms of how a business prepares, and they can share the information. The business owner can share it with their family, can share it with their partners, their supply chain, so they can be ready, their partners can be ready, their families can be ready, and the community can be ready as a whole. So yeah, that's our innovation on the front line. Atlas Ready for Business. Feel free to check it out. It's in the app stores, and hopefully we can provide some information following this as well. And I welcome any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, for that very instructive presentation. What resonated with me certainly is the concept that it's more about the process than the end product, than the plan itself. And I think that's obviously is the case for small and medium enterprises. It's probably the case for a lot of our institutions and countries we work with. So I mean, you mentioned where we could get more information on this application. Maybe if you could just elaborate a little bit further for us, maybe some of the challenges you had when you were developing this. How did you interact with your, let's call them clients in a way, to develop this application? Do you have any lessons learned from that process for our participants?
Sure. Some challenges that we encountered. One is honestly about the technology, that it can be very complex to create a global tool with contextualized content. So to work with every partner to add in their own content is just, as I said, complex on the back end. But it was really just challenging our idea of the fact that a lot of times with innovations, you think you create something and that it's going to apply everywhere, but it's necessary to work with those partners. So even though it takes the time and it takes really effort on the back end of the technology, it's worth it. And just another challenge, I would say, was working with partners and even anyone that thinks about innovative tools and technology. They're really keen to scale. But what does scaling mean? So really, historically, people look at the fact that, oh, the number of downloads you have, or the number of clicks, or the time spent on the different levels. But really what we wanted to look at was not just about that, but the impact of organic scaling. And the fact that if one business, as I mentioned, downloads the app and they make it through the entire app, as we are seeing with those that do download it, they are sharing it with their colleagues who are then prepared as well, and sharing it with their households, and then they're just more prepared, so their supply chain is prepared. So it was really also challenging us and our partners on how to think about scaling, and then later to think about, this will be the next step, how to think about gauging that impact as well.
Thanks, Bonnie. I'd like to give the opportunity for anyone in the audience to ask any questions or on the panel. And also, I remind you that participants online can also ask questions now and throughout the whole session to any one of our panelists. So don't hesitate to intervene also online. But please, ask your question, Ritu.
Thank you. It was really nice presentation. Thank you for that, sharing that innovation. Because I have also worked in my past previous organization a lot with micro and mini enterprises. A big issue with them is linking them to the market, especially if they are sustainability market or to global value chains, getting them certification. So I just wanted to check whether you have plans of linking them to markets, creating opportunity for them to link with global supply chains and so on.
Thank you for that question. I would say that because we just honestly created this tool a couple of years ago, we are looking right now on piloting it. So we're piloting it and seeing if it works with the different partners on the ground before making our way to different certifications or linking with the global supply chain and making those opportunities and market links. So I wish I had a good answer for you at this moment. I would say that we're very open to partnerships that can expand in that way. So this is more just to introduce what we have in mind, how it's working right now at the level we're at, and hopefully it resonates with those of you and yourself so we can learn more on how to make those linkages. So I wish I had a better answer, but that's where we're at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, for this very interesting first presentation. I suggest we now move on to the next initiative, and I'd like to invite Andrew Harper, who's a special advisor on climate action at UNHCR to provide his innovative initiative. Over to you, Andrew.
No, thank you very much. And I'm always worried when working together is considered as being innovative. And because what we're trying to do is just use evidence and use skills and use best practices around the world. So it's not something which we are sort of saying, this is us. It's more that we're collaborating with people who know what they're doing. And we base this approach on the fact that we are not the smartest or know everything, and we don't have the data that's required for us to make the decisions that are needed for people. And so when you're dealing with the lives of people who are extremely vulnerable due to being displaced by conflict, as well as being made more vulnerable by climate, you've got an obligation to get out of your safety zone and work with others. And so if we believe in science, which we do, and if we believe in the value of looking at evidence, which we do, then we should be able to do a much better job than what we are all doing at the moment. And there is not one person in this COP who could not be doing a better job. And so what we've looked at trying to do was to use best practices and centers of excellence around the world to help us inform and focus on one region. And that region that we chose was because we worked with the authorities on the ground. And this is another issue which is best practice. Just don't do stuff because you think it's the right thing to do. Like, talk to the people on the ground and figure out what is it that they actually need and what are the answers that they're required to make the best programming decisions for their populations. And this is what I find still very scary about coming to COP, just the lack of engagement at the community level. So if you look at the next slide, hopefully there is another slide. We went to the Sahel and we spoke to all the UN agencies on the ground and said, okay, what is your plans for the future of the Sahel? It was pretty depressing. Like, either they didn't know or it wasn't very coherent. And that was across the board. I think the Sahel's got 29 different strategies. The next slide, please. And so what we said is, look, we can work with the UN, but the UN, if you assume that 99.99% of the world's smartest people don't work for the UN, then let's look to see who does know what they're doing. And so we came up with a consortium, and again, I don't actually see that this is very innovative. I just see this is what everyone should be doing. We came up with a consortium of who are the leaders on climate impact, so Potsdam. Who knows what they're talking about in regards to conflict, in regards to anticipating conflict? Who knows what they're doing in regards to famine predictions? Who knows what they're doing on water? Because when you talk about refugees, it's not just because of conflict that people move. It's becoming much more complicated than that. It could be forced recruitment due to non-state armed actors. It could be the fact that climate has made it so difficult that governance structures do not work. There may be no water. There may just be one disaster after another, and people can no longer have the resilience to cope, no matter what support you provide to them. You've also got issues of other mega trends, and even if there wasn't a climate crisis, people would still be moving from rural societies to urban centres. This just happens. So there is elements which we have to take into account, and so we brought something like about 20 plus actors together to say, okay, what do you know and what does your modelling tell you and what is the data that you're missing? And collectively, we were just brainstorming and saying, okay, who has got population estimates for the Sahel? Where are you doing your urbanisation predictions? How are you looking at your water ground table level, anticipating at various scenarios? And so what I've found, which I've not found in any other sector, humanitarian development, peace building, security, was that the academic sector were really quite cool. They wanted to collaborate. And so I'd also go back to the first point. It's the outputs can change, and there was a description by the UN Special Coordinator for Development in the Sahel, and he said, what we're doing is creating a river of data and analysis. It will find its own path as we move forward. And I think this is the other element. We cannot be fixated that we know everything. Every model, every assumption will have to be adjusted according to the changes on the ground. Everything that's been written has been written about the past. Every decision that we're making will be made about the future. And so there are options in regards to what pathways and what scenarios we have for the future. I think that was basically it. Is there any more slides? I try to keep it to one or two. Yeah, so the challenge is, I'll just leave it at that. Like, no one is really sharing data in the way which they should. Everyone, and I've spoken to 100 agencies, almost everyone in this COP, and asked, can you be fully transparent with your data? And the general approach is, one, they either don't have the data or they don't want to share it. Every agency, every organisation still believes that data is an element of their power, an element of their relevance. So the only way which we can address that is neutralise the branding on some of these reports and put the ownership on the ground level with the community. I think that'd be really quite innovative. Don't take credit for the work which is not yours. So I think that's innovative.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for being so clear and precise in your presentation and on time. You'd expect me as someone working for the World Meteorological Organization to come back on your data point. I won't, actually. My first reaction, a lot of us, I mean, these are tools that are developed to support decision making. And I think we all have a challenge in developing these tools and ensuring that they suit their initial purpose. I mean, how did you engage your audience in a way, the people in the countries that are going to be using this information that you provide through this platform in the process?
Good point. Because again, it's no use having the data and having it discussed at COP or at New York or Geneva or Rome or wherever. It needs to be discussed in Dakar, in Nouakchott, in Niger, in Burkina Faso. And so what we did was the ownership of the project is in Dakar and as part of the Sahel. So we are working in support of the United Nations integrated strategy for the Sahel and the G5 there. And so the questions that we have put to the consortium have been derived from Dakar, Mauritania, Burkina Faso. So this will then feed into their policy planning. So we actually had to fast track the draft report in order that it could be put forward to the meeting of the G5 as well as the Security Council mission to the Sahel. So this is like what a lot of academics want, which is not surprising, is that they want their work and their research to lead to policy changes for the betterment of people on the ground. This is what we're doing. We're just trying to, but the best way of doing that is to make it relevant to what the needs are on the ground. So I'm completely confident that that what has been prepared by the consortium is already making a difference to policy decisions on the ground.
Great, nice to hear, and I'd be happy to, through our work in the region, we generate quite a lot of climate data, we try, and I'd be happy to discuss this, to have this as a follow-up. If there are any questions, please, could you have a microphone? People are online, so you need to speak into the microphone.
Thank you. Actually, I do agree with what you were saying. I think data is definitely political, and whoever controls the data has the power. We've seen that in India as well, in Delhi. I mean, this is regarding the air pollution. And air pollution has been there for some time. I mean, it's been there for quite a long time in some of the cities in India. But when the government actually recognized that the data needs to be shared, there are third parties and there are so many people who are sharing that kind of data, then the accountability comes into play. But do you think that how do you authenticate this data? Like there are so many agencies who have who come up with these data. There is government agency, there is a third party, there is NGO, there are international agency. How do you kind of say which one is better and which one is authentic? Do you face that in your app and in your work as well?
Good point. It's almost impossible to do it from afar. So as you've got to be on the ground. And the same thing with looking at weather and looking at water. You've got to have those physical measurements. It can't be replaced by satellite imagery. It can be compensated, but it can't be replaced. So having people on the ground working with communities is the best way to ground truth the results. The other way is almost to create competition between the academic institutions to look at what are their various scenarios telling you on, for instance, the capacity for different staple food crops to survive heat stresses. No one really knows because no one has entered this phase that we're about to enter. So all we can look at is various scenarios and not discount anyone. And as I said, everything that we're doing is like a river which we feed into. It will choose its own path.
Thank you, Andrew, for these very interesting insights. We'll have opportunities to come back with some other interventions as we move forward. But I'd really like to keep going. So we've got three very interesting presentations to come. And as I say, we will have more time for discussion at the end. Our next intervention is online, and it's Jonathan Rivers, who's the head of hunger monitoring unit at the World Food Programme. Jonathan, if you're online, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Let me share my screen real quick. Okay, great. Great. As was mentioned, my name is Jonathan Rivers. I lead WFP's Hunger Monitoring Unit. And just to give a bit of context, the Hunger Monitoring Unit itself is the team within WFP that's responsible for providing meaningful, up-to-date information at any given point for any of the 90 plus countries in which WFP operates. So that's basically my day-to-day job, is trying to keep track of what's happening in all these different countries. But it's a pleasure to be here. And I hope what I'm going to share about WFP's Hunger Map Live is useful to furthering conversations about how information can support kind of resilience building and throughout the world in response to climate change. I think just to jump right into it, with the adoption of the SDGs, the international community and WFP committed to building a world with zero hunger by 2030. Now, ending hunger, which is obviously something that's been with mankind since the beginning of time, is quite an ambitious goal, and particularly so when you consider the context in which hunger flourishes. So we're talking about countries and recurrent conflicts, countries affected by recurrent natural disasters, climate change, and as we've seen with COVID and the Ebola epidemics, diseases that have knock-on effects on supply chains, on the economic well-being of households. So this is where hunger is focused, and it's hard enough to proactively address those issues in those particular contexts, given what's going on. But what we've seen is obviously this is made worse by a lack or a fragmentation of information that's available to the actors on the ground. And so one of the, and as we know, less information means less effective programming, and that's just how it is. And so what we've seen within WFP is an increasing recognition of this, and increasing investments in what we're calling kind of a digital transformation. But in essence, a large part of it, I would say, is a modernization of WFP's information systems. And that's kind of what I'm here to talk about today. That one such initiative that began in 2017 was the development of WFP's Hunger Map Live. This system is what we term as WFP's global hunger monitoring system, but it's an integrated near real time monitoring system that allows us to pull together not only information on hunger, but information on conflict, on climate issues, on economic issues, etc., and look at this data together holistically, and to do that all the time. The food security information that underpins this system is basically a combination of two sources. One is what we term as our near real-time monitoring systems, which are mobile phone-based household tracking systems that allow us to speak to thousands of households a day and more than 35 countries, and ask them specific questions about food security, their diets, their challenges, etc. And this is very powerful because it gives us kind of daily estimates of what's going on around the world in these 35 plus countries. And just to give a sense of scale, it's probably 75,000 plus questionnaires a month on a regular basis that we're collecting. The other source of information on food security in the hunger map is using the totality of the food security information that WFP has had from all the various surveys, from partner surveys as well, that collect key indicators on food security, and pulling that all together over the last couple decades, and trying to create models to give our best estimates, machine learning based models to give our best estimates as to what's happening in the 50 plus countries where we do not have our near real-time monitoring systems. So in essence, on a day-to-day basis, we have either updated actual data from countries, or we give our best estimates given everything that's going on in that particular country in terms of the different drivers of food insecurity as to what the current situation is. Now, what Hunger Map Live has done for WFP specifically is it's provided kind of three key benefits. One, it's an early warning system. So we see with our monitoring systems that we can very quickly track deteriorations in household food security, particularly in our near real-time monitoring systems, which means that we can see almost immediately if things are happening in a particular place. We can see the impacts of that on households and thus react to it. So that's kind of from an early warning and kind of response perspective. We can also use it as a calibration tool because it's so sensitive for our ongoing programs in conflict settings, or if there's natural disasters. We can immediately use how that information is changing, how household well-being is changing, to immediately implement changes to our programming to make them kind of more effective, or to reach people in need better. And then finally, I think one of the things that the system will provide over time is that given that we're tracking hunger, given that we're pulling in information on conflict and climate and other drivers of food insecurity on a regular basis, we will then be able to use the totality of that information over time to understand much better how we can proactively address some of these challenges in such a way as to build resilience rather than just focus on response. And so this is a very important, just the ability to have all of this information in one spot, and the ability to analyze it collectively will provide us this capacity increasingly over the coming years. And then finally, just to kind of close, let me give you a live example of how this has been used, or an actual example of how this has been used. And here I'm just providing the example of Madagascar over the past year plus. And basically you can see, so this is kind of a screenshot of Madagascar in the hunger map. And it shows the trends over time that we were observing in the different parts of Madagascar. And so you can see, basically, we were capturing immediately the problems in southern Madagascar, and we captured them as soon as September, October 2020. That was months before alarms were raised specifically about this, and it was months before other food security classification schemes were aware of the severity of what was happening there. This provided WFP an advantage in terms of being able to scale up our activities to be able to anticipate the caseloads that needed to be responded to, and it allowed WFP to move into other areas of the country that they may not have been expecting more quickly, and all of that basically mitigates to some extent the severity of the impact of the drought on people's lives. The other bit of this is that in the course of kind of our emergency response, in the course of providing food to people that need it, WFP also is able to do other types of activities that are intended on supporting people's livelihoods or building infrastructure in communities that may support drought resistance in the future, et cetera. And so this system also enabled us to scale that up more specifically in the communities that need, and hopefully will continue to do so moving forward. So I think I'll leave it there, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. That was a really excellent presentation. I actually, before taking my current function, I was working with UNDP in Haiti, and so in preparing for this session, I was going on to this tool, looking at the information that is provided for Haiti, and I mean the granularity, I mean it's really excellent. It really reflects very nicely the context, the situation in the countries, and you know, very useful information you have there. Jonathan, you mentioned early warning. This event is organized in the context of the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, and you can probably expect what my first reaction is to your presentation. So, with all this information you produce in order to trigger early warning, how do you ensure that information actually translates into early action with your partners? Maybe you could provide us with a specific example on how you do that, and then I'll invite some other questions from our audience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so we are actually, you know, we're doing this near real-time monitoring in a number of countries, and so we have a number of examples where we see changes in food security situations that are associated with specific events, and I'll give you kind of a couple of examples of this. And I must also say that despite this kind of granularity, this ability to see this, I mean, I think we're still learning how best to integrate real-time information into programming, because obviously we're a UN agency, we're a big UN agency, you know, we work on planning cycles, et cetera, and so to kind of shift on a dime is difficult. But just to give you a couple of examples, one of the longest running near real-time monitoring systems that we have is in Yemen, and this has been going for 2+ years. And what we see in Yemen, for instance, or what we've seen in the past in Yemen was, you know, very serious deterioration in the lead up to the famine declarations, I guess, at the end of 2019 or so. And we were able to capture that deterioration very early. And so a lot of the discussion about what was happening on the ground was already well known as a result of that system. The thing that happened around that time was there had been the port closure in that area. There was no food passing through that port And so there was a ceasefire declared in December. And within a week that food started moving, we noticed the numbers getting better and better and better in those areas. And so that's an example where we didn't necessarily use it for early action, but it was useful to understand that just that ceasefire, which is a non kind of food security intervention, was able to have an impact almost immediate. And we can track that and we can know that and we can advocate for that type of thing, knowing with evidence that food security improves. Another example, which we've been kind of tracking over time now, is the siege on Marib in Yemen. And we can actually see when violence around there spiked and the siege began, we noticed with quite some precision how the numbers moved. And we were able to estimate that, probably in the near term, additional assistance in the realm of 15,000 households would be required. And indeed, what was provided on the ground was an increase of about that amount in the areas surrounding Marib. So these are really examples from early response, I would say, but response itself to natural or to conflict in this particular case. But when we start talking about true anticipatory action and kind of building institutionally people's capacity to deal with shocks, all the fact that we have all this information together, that we can track where cyclones hit and what the impact is, or we can track where hurricanes hit and what the impact is, that over time that evidence base is going to grow to such an extent that we will have much more detailed information that on what actually happens in those particular cases and what we can do in advance that may help mitigate it, let's say.
Thank you, Jonathan. Do we have any questions? Yes, please.
Thanks, John. So I'm from the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership, so I have a specific interest in this. And I suppose my question and comments come from the two last presentations. I'm just thinking about how, the issue of data gives agencies power, but it also has particular sensitivity, I think, in these conflict situations. If you speak to a protection person and you mention data, they automatically think that you want to share all of their beneficiaries' private information with forces. It's really, really sensitive, and I think that it makes humanitarian responders in conflict situations more conservative or more cautious than they need to be about looking at these early action approaches. And I wonder then is the fact that, obviously REAP, the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership, we're trying to bring together the climate, the development and the humanitarian sectors to benefit from each other. And when I think about, you were mentioning there's climate and conflict. Climate is leading to more conflicts. It's exacerbating them. There's lots of conflicts that are seasonal or regular that we're going to hear much more about because they will escalate so much. And they're very low data, and they actually really need to be able to be aware of and feed on these early warning initiatives and remote sensing and predictive analytics and everything else that there is available. But there is that kind of cautiousness.
Good morning, all top delegates.
I'll just wait.
We kindly remind you to wear your face mask over your mouth.
Maybe that was for me.
At all times. During your time in the conference, unless you are seated in a room with appropriate distance.
Sorry.
Or whilst eating or drinking or are medically
Can you hear me if I go? No.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Sorry for getting us all in trouble. But I just wonder, and I think about when I was a humanitarian response person in South Sudan, in Bentiu in 2014, it was the front line, it was the start of rainy season, and we knew that it was going to be bad when it came. And I bring this example up a lot because it brought me into early action. So we knew the rainy season was coming, and we had 60,000 people in abhorrent circumstances already, but we didn't know how bad it was going to be. And when it did come, it was absolutely horrific. A third of the camp was underwater, people drowned in their shelters, we lost everything that we'd built. And we were like, oh, if only we'd known. And actually, I now know that there was loads of information available from not just crews, but other organisations, but we didn't know about it. WFP and UNHCR were present in the camp, but because they're so huge, didn't know about all these things that are available. So for me, I think particularly conflict humanitarian response, there is a serious lack of awareness of all these initiatives like Cruise and all these things that they can call on in a place where, like, I mean, there was no electricity, no communications or anything up in Benchu. And we're not, I suppose my question is, what's the role of REAP? What should we be doing for your organizations who have these things to make our humanitarian partners be more aware? But also, what are the kind of conversations we need to initiate around risk communication and warning communication to make people feel more open, particularly on the protection and the conflict side, to see it more as a solution and not just a risk? Sorry, long-winded.
No, thanks, Emma. And if any of you doubted that we were actually live, you could see that we are really here at the COP26, so it's happening now. No, thank you, Emma. And obviously, this is one of our big challenges in breaking down some of these silos between the way we work. And it's relevant to obviously to Jonathan, but some of the other interventions. Maybe Jonathan, if you want to have a quick comment on that, and maybe the other speakers can keep it in their comments, their responses to the end of the session.
No, I think it's a very good question. In terms of data sharing, in terms of confidentiality, in terms of not sharing things that may endanger people, it's a tricky business, and there are increasing kind of bodies of work out there that kind of provide some guidance, some normative guidance on how we can do these things more effectively, more safely. But I do think that by and large, the comment is correct, that there is sometimes lack of data sharing simply because we don't want to endanger people that are in particular situations. And we have different ways of handling that within the hunger map. So we provide currently processed information, for instance. So we provide numbers at aggregate levels, not at household level. We don't publish any of the raw survey data without scrubbing it of all personal information, etc. But I do think the comment's valid in terms of what can be done to kind of advise the larger UN agencies. Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think there's potentially a lot that can be done, and particularly on data. This increasing the normative guidance about this, trying to make the linkages between the different actors, for instance, and point us all in the wrong or in the right direction when we're going in the wrong direction.
Thanks, Jonathan. We are getting some questions coming in online, but we do have two very exciting initiatives that we're going to be lucky to hear about. So I'm quite keen if maybe we can move forward with those two presentations, and we'll keep some of the questions and comments for you to feedback on the end. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our next presentation, which is by Professor Ian Woodhouse, who's the co-founder of Blox. And maybe you can explain to us a little bit what Blox is and present your initiative. Thank you. Over to you.
Good morning. I'm just going to wait for the slides to come up, but I'm going to talk about Strata. Really excited about talking about Strata because Andrew mentioned a river. There's also a data lake of vast amounts of data, so more than 700 data sets on Google's Earth Engine. It's a huge repository. It's got more than 40 petabytes of data, geospatial data, mostly satellite data, but not just satellite data. To give you an idea of what 40 petabytes is, if you put them on DVDs and you stack them up, Jeff Bezos' spaceship would only just be able to get over the top of it. Okay, so it's a lot of data. But there are barriers to accessing that data, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But Strata is a hotspot mapper, and it accesses Earth Engine in a way that makes it much more accessible. It's supported by the UN Environment Programme is leading on it. They are the key people that want to be able to support their in-country teams. It's in collaboration with the University of Edinburgh, and Blox is building the interface. The support comes from the Norwegian government and the EU, And the Group on Earth Observations and Google are also supporting the access to Earth Engine. The QR code, by the way, is going to be up again at the end. So if you get your cameras ready to get that, it's got a little video of the animation, and perhaps if the editor at the end will be able to take off the little picture at the top there, they'll be able to see the whole QR code. But next slide, please. So Strata is it's a portmanteau word of stress and data, and essentially what it is it's a hotspot mapper looking at environmental, social, and peace and security data. So it's not a modeler. It's not trying to model or predict. It's not making future forecasts. It's an aggregator of data because it is difficult to access a lot of this data. One of the key things about the design of it is that it has been designed, and that's a topic that's come up already, it's been designed with the teams in Somalia. So Somalia has been our focus for developing this tool. And this is one of the first times that we've shown it in public, and so we're really keen on feedback. It's not finished yet, and any kind of feedback or thoughts about it would be really welcome in terms of the development of it. So local teams in Somalia, government, UN, NGOs, but also teams in Colombia and Haiti have also been feeding in terms of the design and the indicators that it uses. Now the key thing there's two parts to Strata. One is the more technical one where people can actually build the hotspot mapper, and then there's a dashboard, which is the next slide. But the building of these blocks, so these on the left is a simple drag and drop interface. One of the barriers for accessing all that data I mentioned in Earth Engine is that you have to write Python or JavaScript to access it, or somebody will build a static app that does one particular thing for you. But what we've developed here is something that's a lot more customizable, because we recognize that, well, at different times of the year, in different countries, in different regions, having one index for everything doesn't always apply. You want to change the parameters and the indices, the indicators that you might use in that. So we've made it a simple drag and drop feature where you can just drag in the indicators that you want or drag out the ones that you don't. It's built on a convergence of evidence approach. So it's trying to be relatively simple, because all it is trying to do is aggregate the data so that you can see where all these stressors are occurring in the same location. And so what it does is it looks at the different indicators. It looks to see if it's crossing a threshold, and then it red flags it if it's crossed that threshold. But the users can also modify those thresholds. So we set some ones based on the literature that we propose are a good default, but it gives flexibility for the user to say, well, actually, I think the threshold should be different. And these indicators, they come in three lots. The environmental ones are to do with flood risk. They look at historic vegetation trends. They look at deforestation trends. They can pick out information on heat waves or rainfall, so meteorological drought. And the key thing is that because it's got this vast amount of data that it can look back in history, it's not just telling you what's happening now, but it's telling you trends in terms of whether it's wetter or drier than normal, whether the vegetation is lower than you would expect for this time of year. The second indicators are to do with peace and security. So they're driven mostly by the IIED database, but it's aggregating again. So it's saying this particular region has got a history in the last 5 years of, and then you set your threshold of the many different indicators that you can get from IIED. And then there's the vulnerability indicators, which is information on the various indicators that are in there just now are to do with food security, to do with access to healthcare, access to urban areas. And the key thing is that you can customize that for the particular questions that you're trying to ask. And this is the key thing is this is a case study, so we're looking to also expand it to different applications. This will apply globally, so the platform as it stands will be able to apply to any country anywhere in the world. But we're also looking to expand it to identify other kinds of risks. On one of the other things to do with data, so the next step that we're doing on Strata is going to make it possible for users to upload their own data. So if they have their own data that they don't want to share with other people, they can just upload it and use it in their version of Strata and incorporate it into the platform. Next slide, please. And then the second part is the interactive dashboard. So that can be a separate website. So a lot of users, we anticipate that most of the users won't look at the bit with the blocks, but will just be looking at the updated dashboard that will be regularly updated. It identifies both the hotspots as a hotspot map, but also as a bitmap. You can also see it in political regions. So in this case, it's the districts or drilling down to the regions and then drilling down to the districts of Somalia. The interactivity of the dashboard means that the dashboard user can also just look at individual indicators. I just want to look at the flood risk. I just want to look at the conflict indicator information and just look at that. So you can look at each of the different components that have been used to build together the hotspot map. And then you can download that data and use it in other contexts as well. Next slide, please. Oh, and there's the little thermometers, which is the general sort of general status as an indicator of the entire country. Is it worse? Are there more red flags than you would expect for that time of year? So that you've got a simple thermometer stage. Thank you for taking off the pip at the top. So the QR code will give you, it's a little video on YouTube that just shows some more interactivity and the different steps that you go through to look at how you would use Strata. And we're very keen to find people to collaborate with and to build on this, because there's lots of activity in this sector. We're not necessarily the experts, but we are experts at accessing this kind of data and making it more accessible. I'll finish there.
Thank you, Ian, for the presentation. Very interesting. It's actually triggered some reactions from our audience online. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to start going through some of these online questions. One of it is I think will be interesting. I can't see who are actually asking these questions. I imagine it's because I keep my phone close to the microphone.
If they're easy questions, they're probably my family watching online. But it's,
yeah, it could well be, actually. Excellent presentation, it says. So the question is, is it talking about sharing data, analytics, and models? Is the interoperability of such interactive applications with other applications mapping hazards explored? So in other words, they would be interested to overlay these different systems. Do these different systems that have been presented talk to each other? I think is the question that's been asked here.
From my perspective, not yet. But UNEP are one of the things that we've been doing with UNEP is looking at that interoperability and making sure it does talk to all the other systems. So it is integrated. So it's not just using APIs to get the data, but has an API to extract it into other platforms.
And then any other views from the other panelists on this one?
Yeah, because I've already asked my team while you're doing the presentation to sort of say, okay, what are we doing with them? And this is where it's important to sort of figure out who's doing the best job. And so we can collaborate with WFP, for instance, on the hunger mapping side of things. And they've got 70,000 surveys which they're going out. So how do we get the results of those surveys? We don't need individual households, but we know we need the results of those at the sub-national level to feed into this to see whether where those heat stresses that you're looking at the temperatures is having an impact on crops. And so I'd also be interested to see the time series going back and then to see whether we could use it for the Sahel, for instance. And so there's huge amount of collaboration. And for instance, our innovation team is already working with Edinburgh, I believe, on that. So there's all this amount of exchange going on. But what I think we've also finding is that no one really knows what the others are doing. And I think this is one of the positive things is that I'm hearing Ian, I'm hearing the others and sort of saying, okay, wow, like, why haven't we got them on board so far? So it's basically building a system where everyone is looking to achieve a common outcome. And so what Ian has presented then looks really cool. But I would also say, look, like, ACLED is good, but we also need to be working with others too. And this is where you sort of get comparisons in assessing future conflicts. So this is where it's always about sort of building up your consortium or your coalition or system of best practices. But we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Andrew. And I hope we have colleagues from REEC in the room, so I hope they're hearing this and they don't always know what the others are doing. That's something for you to think about.
Can I just have
Please, Ritu, please.
A very quick comment. Question is it open source? Is it open to everyone to explore? As you said, they can upload their own data and then generate their own analysis.
My understanding is with UNEP is that the UNEP teams will have the access to the sort of the building part of it, but the dashboards will be open for everybody to look at and investigate.
And just one comment on what you said. See, when you talk, the approach that you talked about and you're already doing is exactly what we need. But I don't know whether we are also linking it with the policymakers, like with the government decisions, whether, especially when they talked about the WFP program, is it linked to social protection entitlements? I know they mostly work in the conflict area where social protection is generally fragile in a fragile state, but it will be important to see how these data information is being actually used to devolve support, entitlements, and whether it brings benefits closer to the community, which is already actually in need of it.
Thank you, Ritu. And if I could ask the other panelists just to keep that question in mind, because I know you do have an initiative which demonstrate how to talk to the social protection side of the equation. So maybe we could go to have your presentation next, and then we can obviously invite the other panelists to maybe after her presentation to react, or do you prefer to react now?
It was just a quick comment. Any
Please.
data set that's got an API access, then certainly Strata can read that in, because the aggregation of that data is part of what we're looking at. And I'm not an advocate for, I'm not employed by Google, but Google's Earth Engine is a place where they are extremely open about allowing people to put new data on that and making it available. And so there are some tools already available to make it easy to share these data sets. We just have to kind of talk to each other more often.
But does it go, you mentioned Google can put that on their platform. Can we get that data off their platform?
Off the Earth Engine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was also the question. Like, can we access the data which is informing your models?
All the data that informs the so it's not a model for Strata, but it's all that data is available on Earth Engine. ACLED, we have a separate connection through for that. Mm-hmm. But at the moment, there's no reason to have. You can have other APIs that feed in to give you other indicators.
No, thanks for that clarification. So, Ritu, if we can move over to you now for your presentation.
Thank you so much. Can I have my presentation screen? So maybe I'll just come here. Okay. Thank you. So, as like you, I really get excited when I talk about CRISP-M. So I'm not going to go into detailing out what the acronym stands for, because I'm sure you're not going to remember it. Can I go to the next slide, please? But I'll just quickly talk about why we made this tool for and for what purpose. So this tool, CRISP-M, is essentially for a program called Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, MGNREGS. And it's also one of the world's largest social protection program, which is based on public works. This program entitles 100 days of employment to every rural household in India. And you can understand a highly populous country like India, the scale that this program has, it covers about 250 million people, 125 million households, and the annual budget is close to 11 billion per annum. We engaged with this program because we thought if we are able to do something with this, the scale is huge. We are really going to impact a lot of lives. Now, what this program does is, in lieu of that wage employment, it creates a lot of water conservation and harvesting structures, which essentially should help in watershed management, drought proofing, and so on. As you see in the third bullet there, it also says that this program is essentially for social protection, for providing social safety net. But in due course, government also realized that this is a program that can also help build climate resilience. And it has introduced a new provision which says not a very new provision, it's been there for a few years now, which guarantees additional 50 days of employment to households which are facing drought-like situation. So can I go to next slide, please? But what are the issue? Where do we actually need a tool like CRISP-M? So when we actually did our research, we found that majority of the households which could have accessed that additional 50 days of employment were not able to access that employment because the drought was declared about 6 to 8 months after the drought actually happened. So there was no drought early warning system and also no drought assessment process in place because the Indian Manual for Drought Management is so complicated, it makes it difficult for the state government to collect all the data which is needed to declare a drought. And again, the Indian monsoon in itself is quite complicated, in the sense the rainfall, the amount of rainfall that happens is quite normal, but it happens within a very short span of 90 days, 3 months. That's when all the rain falls within a year. And that too, there's huge amount of variation in region. So one region receives a lot of rainfall, the other region receives very less rainfall. And there's also a huge variation. So like a huge dry spell between two rainfall events. And this dry spell is with impact of climate change. The dry spells are increasing, and the intensity of rainfall on those days when rainfall actually happens is increasing. So that actually leads to, so if you, in effect, if you see, the rainfall is normal as per hydrological parameters, or as per meteorological parameters, but because there's a huge dry spell between two rainfall events, there's actually agricultural drought which does not get captured. There's also hydrological drought because there is water stress in different areas. So that's why we came out with this tool, because what this tool helps is, it helps in providing impact assessment of drought on a real-time basis and also a drought early warning system along with it. The second aspect of this MGNREGS program is to help create water conservation, natural resource management assets. But these assets are mostly ad hoc basis. They're just for point-to-point recharge. So this whole vision with which this program was created for a long-term drought proofing, that over a period of 7 to 8 years, they'll be drought proofing, there will be flood resilience created. That does not happen because these structures have been not created on a rich to valley concept. It doesn't really lead to watershed management. So can we go to the next slide, please? So what we did, more than the tool itself, I just wanted to talk about the process with which we created this tool. And we call it 5 principles of business unusual in the way we try to approach the development of this tool. First, we understand, and we knew that the moment we were talking about drought early warning system, there's a lot of secrecy. Even, this is an international platform, I shouldn't be talking so much, but there's a lot of secrecy around the drought-related parameter and those data that is there. So we needed to bring about that transparency in that data sharing. And also there are a lot of aspects, especially in terms of river basin management data, the contours, that are extremely secret because India shares its boundaries with, hostile neighbors, I would say, and therefore a lot of these data is very secretive. And because we don't have access to data, watershed management or proper watershed management does not happen, especially when you're talking about different layers of GIS, Geographic Information System. So what we tried to first understand was what is the landscape of climate information currently available, who's generating data, at what frequency, whether it is available, whether it is not available, and so on. And then we started bringing all of them on board. We had a little bit of advantage because we were working with Ministry of Rural Development, and then we started using them as a convening power to bring all these agencies together. And we also adopted an approach of co-development with about 12 government agencies, right from those who were generating the data to those who were analyzing the data to those who are finally using or who would be finally using the data, both MGNREGS functionaries as well as the community. And this was a tough process. The first 2 processes was really tough, getting all of them on board, signing up to it because everyone looks for incentive. What is my incentive of joining this? Because these were all government agencies. The third was we wanted to make sure that we institutionalize this effort, that this tool was not created outside the government system, and then we were asking the government later on that, see, we have pilot tested it, now you retrofit it with the existing government program. We wanted to make sure that it was institutionalized right from the beginning and that it took into consideration the existing infrastructure that the government has, their capacities, their technical capabilities, and so on. And that, again, it made our life difficult because it would have been easy for us to develop and then ask them to retrofit it. But this process took time, but I can say that they own the tool now. We don't say we own it. The map cost and the agencies who are developing it own it. The fourth aspect of it was on communication. We wanted to make sure that it was communicated to the community in a format that they understood, they could decipher, and also use it for the decision making. And finally, for addressing uncertainty, we made sure that this tool was both top-down and bottom-up. So while all the GIS and other layer of information or climate impact data was provided from top-down, but the entire decision-making, everything was happening at the ground level. So it is, in true sense, both top-down and a bottom-up approach. Can you go to the next slide, please? Very quickly, these are the three aspects that this tool covers. One is drought early warning system. Then the second is climate risk-informed asset planning or a watershed management approach. And the third is monitoring. Next slide, please. And this is the way in which the drought early warning system works. So we have two triggers within this tool. One is based on the meteorological data, which we call meteorological drought. That is the first trigger. And then based on that, once that early warning is triggered, then it keeps sending the real-time information about the agricultural drought as well as hydrological drought. And the information is updated on a cycle of 24 to 48 hours. And so I'll just go to the next slide, please. And this is the second component of the tool where we are linking different GIS layers with the climate information. And when we are saying climate information is basically SWOT model, so soil and water assessment tool. So based on that, we basically provide information to the community as to whether the groundwater level are expected to decrease or increase, whether the runoff velocity is going to increase. And then we've also given them a DIY tool, do-it-yourself tool, where wherever they stand it is based on digital elevation model, where wherever they stand on their field, they can assess as to what are the structures most suited for that particular location. And then it is up to them which particular structure they choose for their particular area. Next slide, please. And then basically entire planning happens here. We have sourced a lot of data from open source platforms and then integrated, brought them all together. But there's a lot of data that is only available with government, which have been integrated, although they are not available. But the only reason that they could share it was because it was government-to-government interaction. We just facilitated the whole tool development. Next slide. I'll just quickly flip through the last few slides. So the entire decision-making is with the community. They click the picture. They do a participatory vulnerability assessment, and then they decide which structure has to be built where. Next slide, please. Then there's also a system of crowdsourcing. The monitoring within the program was very one-sided. So with this tool, it has become a two-way accountability process where the community has the power. They click the picture of the structure, what the situation of that structure is, whether it needs repair, whether it is in a good state. They update all the information and then upload it. They geotag where the exact location of that structure is. Next slide, please. And this is the next slide, please. And we are also, along with that crowdsourcing of data, we're also using remote sensing data. So, just you can see the difference in actual status of the ground, whether if the program is working well, then this would not lie. So it is also creating a lot of transparency because MGNR EGS was pitted as a scheme with a lot of leakage and corruption. And this, in a sense, would bring about that transparency and give power to the community. So next slide. And so, while this has been developed for MGNR EGS program, but I'll go to you, Andrew, and others. If there any way, we'll want to share all the codes or any information that you need. If you want to scale it up, we'll be happy to help you in scaling up any of these systems.
Thank you, Ritu. Very, very stimulating presentation and initiative. And yeah, I mean, great to see such a tool which, both for drought early warning, for the management of resources, but also translates that into specific social protection type, wage generation policies and so on. And it was great. Just on your data issue, I mean, because it's come up within a few of the presentations, the challenges in accessing and sharing certain data, including climate data. So just to remind you that the World Meteorological Organization 2 weeks ago adopted a new open data policy. So basically it's using it's the WMO integrated global observation system to better share data between members, including India and other within states in India. So we're really hoping to see this translate into better access of some of this data. Probably not in the very short run, but in the medium run, we're hoping to see that. So you have this in India. I mean, I can tell you from my side, we have a number of programs in other regions, other countries. Anything? Do you think this could be scaled up in other countries? Could it be adapted?
Absolutely. I feel at least the drought early warning system is a tool which can be easily adopted in any other country, especially because we're using there are few data which we are getting from Indian Meteorological Department and IITM and others, but most of the other data is open source. Like we are getting data from USGS, SCAP, so all the other, thanks to World Meteorological Organization. So we are getting a lot of data from their sources as well. So that definitely is very easily scalable. The second component, that is the asset management, there's some information which I think you do need to, if it has to be upscaled in any other part of the world, for example, of Africa, you do need to get some information around contours and other aspects. But I doubt it will be so difficult to get that information. I'm sure many of these countries would maintain that kind of data. The only thing would be to get the government on board with such a process. And the third part, that crowdsourcing of data from the community and remote sensing data, that's again easily scalable. I really feel proud of that component because we're giving power to the community. It was there on paper, the power was on paper with the community, but with this, we've really given them the power to, if the paper says that this structure was there, and when you actually go on the ground, you don't see those structures. But here, the community can say that this structure was not built. Or this structure was built, but it was of poor quality, and I can upload that picture now. So that gives them that power. So it's a two-way accountability system that a tool like this creates. And I'm sure it's just a matter of scaling it up and whether people there want to adopt it. The technology is not difficult. It's just convincing people to accept that level of transparency and accountability to be introduced into new systems.
Thank you. And you mentioned very nicely the sensitivity that there may be around declaring a drought, simply. I mean, if your application then comes out and says, look, we're moving into a drought condition, how do you overcome that sensitivity?
You've touched, that was an issue or a challenge that we faced initially, and we are still facing it. Daljit is there, and she's nodding too, because we had see, in India, there is a cyclone early warning system. There's a flood early warning system. And that government is very happy to accept. The problem is with drought early warning system. One, there are different reasons for that. One, the sheer scale. And if you make that information public, then the onus on government to provide relief, it increases. And right now what happens is, because this whole process, I wouldn't say it's been intentional, but maybe it is intentional. That whole process of drought declaration is so complicated. There's so much of data that the state governments are asked to provide to the central government for them to say, okay, this is a drought of a severe category, this is a drought of a moderate category. That it becomes, many of the drought go unreported. Everyone knows that this area was drought affected, but when you actually go and see on the paper whether this area was drought declared, no, it wasn't. Because the moment you declare a drought, then the onus on the government to provide relief increases. So yes, we faced a challenge. We have piloted it in Bardwani. The government came and they launched the tool publicly, and they said they're going to scale it up in 2 phases. So we are hoping it will be scaled up and it will be implemented in true spirit and letter. And the good thing about this tool was they feel the ownership for the tool. They developed it. We just provided technical support and backing, and so for it's now their tool. And so yes, that makes it easy. So for us, the process was long, but when we reached there, now we are in a much better position to scale it up.
Great, thank you, Ritu. We do have a few minutes. If there are any questions from the audience, Andrew, please go ahead.
I think this is like where it's really important to see where there's regional initiatives that could be scaled up and replicated elsewhere. And so like we're all looking at increasing duration of droughts and intense rainfalls damaging small income assets like farms or even shops. And so this type, I was just looking and sort of saying, okay, how could this be replicated for the dry corridor in Central America, or how could it be replicated in East Africa or the Sahel? And there's a lot of elements there, or even to Central Asia. So I think that this is where there are opportunities to look for where there are examples where governments who are going to be in a similar situation could benefit. Will have to be calibrated to what their needs are and like whether people have got smartphones or feature phones or whatever, but that's okay. But there's another issue in regards to the challenge of data. And it's the issue of trying to also ensure that governments realize that we're working with them and not in order to embarrass them. Because some of the challenges in regards to getting health data or education data, which is really key to, as a precursor for predicting, let's say, a lack of confidence, issues of governance, violence, conflict, displacement, it's not so easy to get. And people would be sort of thinking, okay, one of the best sources is to get from health centres. We struggle getting access to health centre data or real education data talking about the quality of education. And it's often exaggerated in order that for the people who've got the key stakes in that, in order to be looking better. And so and once they buy into this almost exaggerated performance, they can never go back. And so we're almost looking at this, we're living a lie in many aspects in terms of data. And so anything which can look at calibrating and demonstrating what is the situation. Pass it back to Ian.
So you had a word in one of your slides which was really important, which I don't think anybody's discussed yet, but it was uncertainty. And that's one of the things that we've looked at quite a lot in Strata, which is if you're going to produce a hotspot map, how confident are you that that's a true representation, and in the data behind it, can you somehow communicate that to the user? So that's something that we're working on. And the other way that we're trying to address some of those issues of the calibration is that Strata looks at statistical variation. So it's the same parameter, and you might have not 100% confidence in that parameter, but within the country, it at least is showing, well, it's higher over there than it is over there. And so you can take some, you can have a little bit of, you can question it in the actual value that it's representing, but at least the distribution is correct. But how are you dealing with uncertainty?
See, there is uncertainty. And the problem is when the decision makers, the policy makers, and the functionaries, they start treating it as absolutely certain data. Okay, drought is going to increase here. Okay, the rainfall intensity is going to increase here. With uncertainty, we introduced it there that these are trends. And what you need to be prepared for is the most severest, so building redundancies in these assets that they create. So if we are saying that the floods are expected to increase by 3 times frequency, or the runoff velocity. So we essentially are using SWOT models, soil and water assessment tools. So basically it gives you the increase in ground or decrease in groundwater level, or increase in the runoff velocity, and so on. So what we tell community that these data are not certain, but this gives you a general trend. what you need to be prepared is for the worst situation that might occur. So you make your structures future fit. If you know that that the velocity is going to increase so much, how should you treat your the upper reaches, the lower reaches in a way that it helps in reducing that velocity, it helps in stopping the water, it helps in creating the drought proofing in the long run, or flood resilience in the long run. So it's just being open and transparent to them that we are providing you climate trends, but these are not certain. But what it gives you is the tendency of how the climate might emancipate or show up in future, and you have to be prepared for that. So that's why bottom-up vulnerability assessment, and sometimes community also uses a lot of their traditional and local knowledge. And what happens is, yes. So what happens is community. That's why we never decide from our GIS maps, although we know that this particular location is best suited for a field bund or a farm pond, but we don't decide it on the basis of that. That decision making is with the community. So when they use the DIY tool, they go to a particular farmland and they know that at this particular location, this is the runoff. This is so it also calculates the catchment of that particular point. So on the basis of the catchment of that particular point, it gives them, okay, these are the 3 types of structures that is most suited. He may be a very small farmer, have a small land holding, and he probably cannot afford to give up a big chunk of his land for a farm pond. So he'll probably go for a field bund. So he then chooses field bund. So that's the power they have. They know that this can contribute to watershed management or water conservation, but he does his own effort in, or whatever resource that he can provide from his own side.
Thank you. Thank you. And we do have a couple of questions online, including one on scaling up. But I think Andrew, you already started touching on that. I think maybe we have just time just for one more question, but a very quick one because we need to wrap up in 2 minutes. So the last question. And Jonathan and Bonnie, don't hesitate to intervene virtually.
Thank you. Hello. Nope. Yes, now it's working. Yeah. So Gavin White from the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership. I just want to thank this amazing panel for all the diversity of perspectives, because I really felt it the last few days in COP. There seems to be a critical moment in our history where we're seeing a combination of increased impacts of climate, but also increased use of data, and the combination of the two seem to reach a particular threshold that hopefully lead us to change the way we work, right? So as REAP, we're mandated to collect these good practices and get people to work together, hopefully work differently, and see how they can learn from each other. But what I'm hearing from this panel is there seems to be, as part of this threshold, this challenge of going from the awareness of the issue to actually recognizing what do we do about it, and that's a political issue. But we want to keep the political element out of it. So my question, I guess, back to you is there a way in which we can use data to help politicians realize that this should no longer be a political issue, and that there's a way that this could become an automatic activation of thresholds or so forth, so that ultimately they have the data in front of them and say, oh yes, you're right, this is an obviously the technical discussion, we have the elements, so I'm not going to block the decision because of the potential implications for me as a politician if it doesn't work out as planned.
Thank you for that question, and obviously it's quite well, obviously it's very topical, quite a wide one. We won't have time to elaborate too much on it. So maybe just if you have some very succinct thoughts on how to address that challenge, and then we'll be wrapping up. Thank you very much.
Because I've also got to shoot off, but just in less than 1 minute, climate is not impacting communities equally or stopping at state borders. And so getting a regional perspective, and so it's not a particular state authority that's failing, it's a collective responsibility for all the governments, central, regional, Hakim, down to the community level. And then identifying that it's also not necessarily even a country responsibility, trying to break it up into almost thematic groups, looking at what the pastoralists are suffering, or the farmers. And so making it less about politics, but more about the environment and empowerment. And so in the end, everyone wants to improve the well-being of the populations. And you can do that much more collectively than what you can do individually.
Thank you, Andrew. Ritu, a quick reaction?
Very, very quick. I would just say that, you can't stop an idea when the time is right. So right now, everyone, at least in India, we've seen everyone has a smartphone, and data has become so cheap thanks to the geo revolution. So, the transparency would come through government or without government. So, if it is stopped, there are other private players they are actually setting up weather stations, and they are providing, because the community needs that data, and they will, if they know there's value in that early warning system, they're willing to pay for it. So yes, if the idea is right, the time is right, you can't stop it from happening.
Thank you. Ian, some last words.
Yeah, very quickly. Our approach in Strata has been twofold. One is transparency, and the other is simplicity. You can hide things in a model that make it look, a bit like a black box. And so being able to take out the individual components that go into the Strata hotspot map is the way that we see as that allows users to make that assessment for themselves, and they can see what's making up. They can see the ingredients of the the special recipe soup, right? There's no secret recipe to the soup. It's all very clearly spelled out, and they can look at those individual components.
Thank you very much. I think all that is left to do now is thank the panelists for these excellent presentations and the exchanges of ideas. It's been extremely useful. We've heard about 5 tools which translate information into early action. I think we can also call on the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership to continue this discussion, continue collecting these types of initiatives, promoting exchanges in between them. And I'd like to thank the audience, and maybe just leave you with one thought, which came actually from Andrew's introductory comments, is that there's not one person at this COP who can't do their work in a better way. And also, it's not about innovation. A lot of it is about common sense. And I think that's a nice reflection to finish this session. Thank you very much.